afternoon, and welcome to the System Design and Management webinar series. The System Design and Management program is a mid-career master's degree program that's jointly offered by MIT School of Engineering and the MIT Sloan School of Management. The System Design and Management program provides a systems thinking perspective that integrates management, technology, and social sciences to address rapidly accelerating complexity and change in today's global markets. Graduates earn a Master of Science degree in Engineering and Management. The SDM program also offers a one-year certificate in Systems and Product Development. SDM is pleased to offer ongoing opportunities to learn more about application of systems thinking to real-world problems, including this webinar series and our annual conference in systems thinking. This year's conference will be held September 27th and 28th with a focus on reinventing innovation, a whole systems approach to creating new products, services, and the world. To learn more, please visit sdm.mit.edu. We're pleased to have Mark Jernigan present today on applying Joy's Law to open innovation at NASA. Mark Jernigan has more than 35 years of experience at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, where he develops and delivers hardware and software projects and advanced capabilities for spaceflight. He recently completed a rotation as Executive Director of the Rice Space Institute and returned to NASA as Associate Director in the Johnson Space Center's Human Health and Performance Directorate. There he manages the effort to ensure that next-generation human exploration systems and advanced technologies have the necessary capability to sustain the mission's crew, meet human performance constraints, and maximize both mission safety and success. Mark holds a Bachelor of Science in Aero Engineering from Texas A&M University and a Master of Science in Engineering and Management from the SDM program here at MIT. Mark will present for approximately 50 minutes, and then we'll open up the webinar for questions. Please use the chat feature on the webinar to ask questions, and we'll respond to as many as possible. Please join me in welcoming Mark Jernigan for his talk today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. I wanted to give some acknowledgement to my boss, Jeff Davis. He's really been the instigator and the driving force behind our open innovation push here at NASA JSC. So I wanted to give him credit. He's developed a lot of this material that I'm presenting today. I had a pretty good hand in the framework that I'm going to talk about, but this is mostly his baby. This is our little marquee logo for the Evolvable Mars campaign that we at the Johnson Space Center are heavily engaged in developing. Essentially, NASA's strategy is to build all the capabilities that we need to be able to get humans off the planet Earth and to do human exploration of the solar system. And the target that we have is, of course, Mars, and what we're intending to do is put all the capabilities together that it takes to do this kind of a program. My particular directorate is the Human Health and Performance Directorate. What we're charged with doing is all the human health and performance in the space environment. We have the space medicine, where we do healthcare and medical systems. Also, we take care of all the physiological and behavior effects of spaceflight. We also do research and tech development on weightlessness, isolation, autonomy. We do all of the space environmental monitoring and control. The biggest one, of course, is radiation. We have to worry about that, but we also have air and water, microbiology and toxicology, noise, lighting, and all the things that really inform the human or provide the environment for the human to do whatever they need to do. And then the final thing is human systems. We do human systems design, ergonomics, habitability, biomechanics, occupant protection, food systems, those kind of things. So what we do is a human-centered risk assessment and risk mitigation. And the way we sort of manage those is by developing spaceflight human system standards and requirements. A big part of what the work we do is the Human Research Program, and they're working on our set of human system risks, and they're doing the path to risk reduction to get us on an acceptable risk posture for sending people off into space for extremely long duration periods of time. And of course, we do strategy and innovation management here as well. So to give you a flavor of what we actually do, you know, we're really trying to take care of the hostile environment that spaceflight for people entails. That includes the atmosphere. We have to deal with, when we're out in space, we have to deal with vacuum, and when we're on other planets, particularly Mars, the atmosphere is not habitable. Of course, we have microgravity and other gravity transitions, radiation, isolation, closed environment, scarce resources, distance from Earth. Plus, we also have to deal with the large hysteresis in the supply chain. And so those are the hazards that we're dealing with. And so what we've done is characterize those hazards in terms of human risk. So we have physiological deterioration as a risk, radiation damage as a risk, toxin damage, human error, and many others. And so what we do is we take those risks and then we have deliverables that we develop in order to get the mitigations to the risks, which includes technologies, countermeasures, preventions, treatments, and standards. So we have this hostile environment, and we have a very, very broad experience range of doing all the stuff that we've done in spaceflight. But as you can see from the curve, all of our experience base is really in the much shorter durations than what we'll have to deal with. So the future challenge are entailing increasingly complex health risks for longer flights and for habitation. So we're having to deal with these challenges and do the sort of extrapolations to the kind of missions that it would take to send people out to other planets. So I've developed this sort of drawing of to sort of give you a feel for the landscape of the hazard mitigation. So what we have is a broad set of knowledge on what the bad effects of space are on the person, but we also have in that body of knowledge we have known gaps and we have unknown gaps. We have incomplete gaps and we have gaps that are not validated. And those sort of translate into these what we call risk factors, and so some of the risk factors are such as what the effect of microgravity is on muscle deterioration, things like that. They're well characterized, but the mitigation we have needs to be validated some. And what these are indicators are things that we need to do in order to completely control the hazard sufficiently to where it's safe to fly people. Other risk factors are maybe suspected, but we haven't validated. And then we have unknown risk factors. And then the red arrow is sort of our well-characterized risk factors that we have mitigated. And then the bottom one here is we know the risk factor pretty well, but we haven't quite got a mitigation in place. And so what this all feeds into is the control loop that we have for the hazard. So the main thing we have is to control hazards are what we call countermeasures. And so for muscle and bone loss, we have exercise, and we also have pharmaceuticals to prevent bone loss. So what this depiction is, we have a suite of countermeasures already that we've developed for the International Space Station, and they work pretty well. But we're constantly on the lookout for new stuff, and so the other two components that go into managing the risk are our analytical tools and sensors to detect the effects of the hazardous conditions. And each one of these things has certain things that we have to do in order to improve our posture. So the challenge, NASA problems were going to require us to effectively leverage collaboration with external organizations. NASA's landscape is that we have a fixed budget. We need to mitigate all these risks in order to enable the Evolvable Mars campaign. And we don't quite have enough money to do it in the time frame we would like. And so what we're trying to do is effectively leverage off of, get other people interested in our problems and use these mechanisms that we've explored to try to help us solve the problem. So the approach is to understand the landscape and do appreciative inquiry to our problem solvers and pilot techniques to verify that they work and come up with a framework to best match problems for the collaborative strategies. And so what we did is we developed the framework, and then the mechanism we chose was to use one of our open innovation techniques to adopt and deliver a tool to facilitate adoption by our rank and file problem solvers. So our directorate, with this focus strategy for pursuing external collaboration, we have to take on the cultural resistance through workshops and strategic assessments, funding commitments, and performance imperatives. So the dimensions of the challenge. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have increasingly complex problems that are outside of our evidence base. And of course, we have these significant constraints on our talent and our ability to gather new data and resources. One of the other problems of the challenges we had was perception of that nobody outside of our community can actually solve our problem. That's a very strong perception within the NASA community. And one of the other sort of facets of the challenge is that we have to demonstrate benefits of our work to the public. So with all that, we have an unrealized potential for adoption of new mechanisms. And you know, what happened is Dr. Davis went to a seminar by a Harvard Business School professor, Kareem Lakhani, and he really caught the fever for trying to get these open innovation mechanisms inculcated into our culture. And so really the evidence was that other orgs have seen really good results from doing these kind of collaborations. And the other benefit to us is that the NASA brand is pretty strong, and it's fairly easy for us to get collaborators interested in working with us. That's the plus side. The minus side is that we're with the government, and so you know, there's a little bit of bureaucracy involved that makes it a little bit difficult to work with us. So, but overall, I think it's a positive thing for getting people to work with us. And of course, their external opportunities are ubiquitous. So one of the ways that you really sell this to your organization is to really understand the landscape. If you'll look at these two charts that were developed by the NSF, you can see that our investment, while it's a, you know, to us, we think it's a fairly significant amount of money. You know, when this chart was made, our annual outlay was $150 million a year. But if you look at that in comparison to the life sciences industry in the United States, even, you can see that our sliver is just a very tiny bit. So there's a lot of work going on in the life sciences area, and it's just a matter of seeing if any of that work applies to us and whether or not we can harness it. So this gets to the sort of reason for the title slide, Joy's Law. I don't know if you're not familiar with it. No matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for somebody else. And a lot of folks have done some research on why this is, and really the two sort of causal factors behind the law are that knowledge is unevenly distributed. That means that there are pockets of knowledge that's all over the place, and it's not widely shared because the knowledge is sticky. Essentially, von Hippel discovered that people tend to hold on to their stuff, and so if everybody was completely altruistic, you know, essentially all the knowledge would be disseminated, and people would all take advantage of things that are happening in their area. But what happens is most organizations are deriving value from their knowledge, and so they tend to hold on to it unless you can convince them that there's a value proposition to turning loose of it. So this is sort of the chart that sold me on the open innovation deal. As you can see, what this is a chart of publication data in the neurology field from PubMed. As you can see, there's a vast array of linkages between the various researchers in the field. But if you do a sort of what am I connected to, it turns out that even if you go out into the whole network, you still are essentially not capturing, you know, you're not even aware, people are not even aware of what you're doing, and you are not aware of what they're doing as well. So these are the linkages between all these things. And so what the point of this chart is that even though we cast a wide net for working on our human health and performance needs, we still are not very well represented in the whole field of everything that's going on. And so what the intention of pursuing open innovation is to try to get some of the other people that are in this area to look at what we're interested in doing and try to see if any of that work will apply to the problems that we're working on. So to do a more simplistic view of this, what we're trying to do right now, or before we started this, essentially we had the work inside the middle circle, which is, you know, the work that we're doing internal to us, and then the next circle is the NASA inner circle. So we have this family of collaborations going on with researchers that we've had a long duration relationship with, people who are interested in space flight travel. And so essentially we've been sort of limited to the first three circles. But what we're trying to do is, we know that there's plenty of other work going on in the area that we're interested in, and so what we're trying to do is increase the size of the diameter of our potential solutions. So why would you want to go out and tap these resources? So here's the rationale that we developed. Number one, it engages unknown sources of knowledge, skills, techniques, and technologies. It may identify unidentified variables, problem subsets, and characterization of deep features to help solving the problem. So in reaching out to other organizations, what you have to do is you have to do some really deep thinking about what problem you're trying to solve. And by the act of actually doing this, you may actually help yourself in solving the problem. Number three, using these techniques increases the potential for breakthrough improvements and/or cost resource savings. Number 4, it increases the number of potential solutions if you're sort of, there's 4 things. If you're not making enough progress through your traditional means, if you want to add to your multi-pronged search, if you want to just look for ideas to help solve the problem, or if you just want to have another set of eyes that may give you a fresh perspective on the problem. The next one is probably the most important, is it expands the community interested in our problems. So NASA has its own little community of folks, and what we really want to do is get other people out who are working on problems for general human health to get interested in what we're doing, and then if we have common problems, we can work on them together. So, of course, we also have some government imperatives. The federal government policy recently has been putting it on us to try to do more outreach and we are constantly trying to increase the public's awareness of what we're doing here at NASA. And, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have mandates to do more with less, and we have a fixed set of problems and a fixed budget that don't quite match up, and if we can come up with some cost-effective ways of solving our problems, that's all to our good. The other thing that we want to try to do with this framework that we're putting together is to sort of institutionalize our flexible problem solving. We want to provide a systematic way to get answers quickly, and also if you go out to the whole wide world looking for an answer and you don't get an answer, then you know that it validates that you are the only one that's really interested in this, and that you need to sort of redouble your own internal efforts to solve that particular problem. The other thing is it has potential to increase speed of delivery and reduce costs of development. I'll talk a little bit about those things as we are proceeding through. So we'll skip. So what's the landscape of open innovation mechanisms? So the way you read this chart is it goes from left to right. On the left-hand side, that's everybody in the world, and on the right-hand side, that's just us. So we put them into 5 buckets. We have co-development or solution solving, crowdsourcing, facilitated collaboration, strategic partners, and closed models. So I've given some examples of each of these. Essentially, the more you go to the left, the more people you have potential to solve your problem, but you also give up some things by going to the left. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But the examples is at the top for co-development, it's Wikipedia. That's the poster child for co-development. The crowdsourcing is the poster child for that is these maker fairs where you get people, you publicize that you have these problems you want people to work on, and they come in and try to help solve them. And then the middle one is facilitated. That's where we sort of have these community of people that are working on common problems, and we try to communicate with each other to try to help each other out. And then the last one before the closed models in-house is our strategic partners, and those are our traditional people that we get involved in NASA work. So how do you attack this problem? We've been working with the Harvard folks Gary Pisano, Harvard Business School. You know, the Harvard folks are all fond of these 2x2 things, and this one is no different than those. Essentially, if you have the way the axes work is it goes from hierarchical to flat, and then from closed to open. So hierarchical means that I want to solve a problem, and I decide if the problem is solved. And so on that axis, if you're closed, that's just the bottom left-hand corner is your elite circle. Those are the people that work with you all the time. If you get more open, you go into these innovation malls, and our provider in that is called Innocentive, and they essentially have a huge set of people that are in their community, and if you can throw a problem out there, then you'll definitely get some different eyes on the problem. And as we move to the right for flat, that's where we have a real. We don't necessarily tell everybody, you know, we're all working on a common problem, but we all have a stake in it. So a flat closed thing is where, for example, if you're trying to cure cancer, you develop a consortium of people, and everybody's sort of working on the problem, but nobody really controls the flow of all the work. And then the final one is the innovation community, and that's essentially where everybody's working on a problem, and nobody really is constrained from participating. So what we did in human health and performance is we had a few pilots that we did. We engaged Innocentive. Innocentive is an outfit that has a network of 200,000 solvers, and the way that works is you have to offer a financial award so you post a problem, and the 200,000 people think about it and propose solutions, and if you like one of them, you have to pay them a little bit. Then the next one is yet2.com. That's another one of these. It's what we call it's colloquially called a tech scout. Essentially, you give them the problem that you want solved, and then they go off and use their vast network of R&D firms to try to matchmake for you. And so they try to bring people in who might have an answer to your problem. The next one is Top Coder. Essentially, that is a software innovation company, and it's very similar to Innocentive, but what they do is they have software competitions, and then the last one is our own internal one called NASA at Work, and that's where any of our 10 centers can post a challenge that they're working on and try to get other people that are not necessarily already working on it to help them out. So those are the pilots that we ran, and we actually had a fairly reasonable number of successes. We found an ultrasound device that we could send up to the ISS fairly cheaply that met all the requirements. The middle guy is some retired radio guy saw our challenge on predicting the effects of solar, trying to get ahead of solar particle events. And he provided us an algorithm that has great promise to help us in our predictive capabilities. And then the last one was we found a company that can help us do real-time monitoring of water biocides. So to talk a little bit more about Innocentive, their challenges range from 30 to 90 days. They set us up this thing called a NASA Pavilion. I'll show you some of that later. So what you have to do is you post your challenge on the pavilion, and if nobody proposes what your experts deem as a viable solution, you don't have to pay any money, with the exception of an idea kind of challenge where you have to award somebody. So during the process, InnoCentive keeps the crazies out, and they sort of screen it to only those that they think are in the field of possible solutions. And then they have an open period of time where it's open, and then once they have completed, InnoCentive collects up all the proposals and hands them over to NASA, the subject matter expert, who then evaluates them, and then we decide whether or not we want to have an award. So here's what the NASA Pavilion, if you do InnoCentive NASA Pavilion on a web search, this will pop up. So some of the results for our pilot, we had 2,900 solvers for our first set of challenge from 80 countries. As you can see, we started out. These are the 3 entities that put forward challenges, and this is sort of a depiction of what it looks like on the challenge website. So in terms of results, we did this pilot back in 2010. We ended up, as you can see, the numbers are the average. We had maybe, from 200 to 500, 600 sets of project rooms. These are people that have formed together to try to solve the problem. Of course, often they will not be able to come up with something to help solve the problem. But as you can see, there's various success rates, about 20% in some cases, and other cases it's much less than that. As you can see, down 5% for exercise devices. But as you can see in the bottom, or in the final column, we did end up awarding prizes in almost all these cases, and every one of the ones that we got on board have helped us in revising our mitigation strategies for the particular thing that they were trying to deal with. So overall, it was a very successful set of pilots. One of the challenges was to find people who are interested in bone imaging, because we are dealing with bone loss. And as you can see, we ended up identifying 51 potential sources for helping to solve our bone imaging problem. So great. Now what? So we did the pilot, and the results were very promising. But when they rolled this all out to the rank and file, essentially it was a little bit of a dud. We didn't get really the enthusiastic adoption that we were wanting, and so really the number one reason for that is, of course, it's a strange new thing, and I'm busy doing my job, and so how do you go about trying to solve that particular problem? So our strategy there was to develop this framework that's easy to understand, easy to use, and also to sort of put it in people's performance plan, make the employees know that you're serious about this. Also, dealing with the cultural resistance. So we had workshops to talk about the successes and to get people to identify problems that were appropriate. Also by providing this as a new way to get funding to help solve problems, that's a strong incentive, and also recognition and bonuses, and also essentially make sure that there are dedicated resources for the problem. So the other thing is the other impediments were the joys of working for the U.S. government. We, of course, have legal impediments. We have security protocols, and we have to export control our stuff. We have IT firewalls that are make it cumbersome to cooperate. We have a sort of a bureaucratic process to get things to flight. An example is we have this $50 exercise bar that it takes essentially 8 months and $100,000 to certify it safe for flight. Another problem we had was mature partnerships with large orgs that haven't worked, and one of the reasons it's a weak value proposition. The people out there, they see the value of working with us, but they're the plus is it's good to get NASA logo on your as your collaborator, because that gives you some credibility, but it also raises your visibility if your whatever you've done doesn't work out. So it's a little bit of a risk there, and so we didn't exactly have the kind of incentive either. So my key takeaway there is to try to identify all these bureaucratic impediments and to get them all in a big pile and solve each one to get the institutional commitments that you need, or at least an agreement for them to not get in the way. So what's a framework? It's something new, so you have to have facilitators. You got to have people that are experts in using it to try to get people up to speed, and you want it to be something that the rank and file can easily use, and helps decide which mechanism is best, and it helps to supply the resources it takes to characterize the problem, and provides a guidebook for getting through the bureaucracy. And it's nice to have that framework that's connected to the other information sources. So we went off to try to tackle this framework by looking at the solution mechanism process. What we ended up doing is breaking up the work into stages of knowledge. There's unknown unknowns, and then you're aware of an unknown, and then what's your ability to measure it? What's your ability to mitigate the problem? How do you implement it? And then how do you get that implementation deployed? So what you do is, in order to look at the problem, there's two things you have to do. You have to look at the community of solvers, and you have to look at the character of the problem. And by looking at those two dimensions, you can develop this set of criteria that helps guide you as to which mechanism is the right one to do. So the first thing is to do the problem identification. What type of problem is it? In our domain, it's either knowledge, analysis, sensor, or countermeasure. And so with this problem, have you characterized it very properly? Do you understand the deep features of the problem? You do those, you look at what are the constraints, what are the needs, you get those all written down, make sure that you have removed as many constraints as possible and defined the needs as clearly as possible. Then you have to go off and characterize the problem, look at the landscape. So what's the criticality? How urgent is the solution needed? What's the time frame required for completion? How much time does the org take to adopt? If that has to be factored in, that also goes into your time equation. And then the last one is, what's the resources situation? Do you have enough approaches being pursued to get you to an answer? Are the resources sufficient? All of those factor into which of these mechanisms are the right one to use. So, the next thing you do is who out there might be interested in or capable of solving it. So, what you want to look at is a term we call universality. How generalizable is the problem? Can you garner interest from other technical communities? So can any of the constraints be removed to open it to other domains? Can the problem be isolated from the system to remove constraints? Then the last thing you do is look at your partners. Are there people in your partner set to see if they're working in similar domains? And you do a sort of a matchmaking kind of thing with those folks to see if that works for you. And then the next thing you do is just post the challenge to see how many people are interested. And if you haven't done a good job in generalizing it, essentially you won't get a lot of interest in trying to solve it because it'll be too specific to your particular domain. And finally, the last thing is to, when you regularly meet with your partners, you try to have this as a topic, as a discussion item, and try to get people interested in solving it. So, the way the framework works is we have the solution matrix. Each mechanism has characteristic strengths and weaknesses. The problems match with the strengths and weaknesses, and the mechanism has a questionnaire that collects the characteristics and divides and helps codify the methods. And then we have a catalyst team that is there to help facilitate the process. So essentially, this model is scalable depending on the scope and priority, and the smaller low priority problems can be addressed by a single person with the help of a catalyst team and getting the discipline lead to agree. The model here is suitable for complex high priority problems, and of course the organizational culture and political landscape always has to be addressed if you're going to adopt something like this. So just to reiterate a little bit, the more constraints you have and the more interested solvers you have, the higher likelihood that an open innovation solution will be actually useful for you. It's a really easy sort of metric. You try to reduce the constraints and get more people interested, and therefore you have a better chance of solving with one of the open innovation mechanisms. So in the interest of time, I'm running kind of long. Essentially, the matrix matches those characteristics. Here's the mechanisms that we have at NASA. We have contracts or RFIs, literature search, networking. We have various contract mechanisms and grants that we have, collaboration, and then of course we have the other ones, open sourcing, crowdsourcing. We have lots of STEM activities where a student might develop a concept that we're interested, and then finally we have the assisted partner search. And this is just an example set. The current guide has more stuff now in it. Here's sort of what it looks like. It's really I don't have enough time to go through how the mechanism works, but essentially each one of these open innovation mechanisms, each one of these mechanisms has characteristics, and we match the characteristics of the problem to the mechanism, and then essentially what it does is it tries to provide guidance to the solver as to which one to use. So here's the timeline of what we did. We developed the framework back in June of 11, and then we got our top coder innovation mechanism engaged in trying to provide a solution. And as you can see, in 6 months, they had a working prototype for us. And I'll show you a couple of screenshots. Essentially, the graphic is you have all of these various mechanisms you can use. And so how do you decide? Well, what you do is you use our little solution mechanism guide, and what it does is it prunes off the things that are not appropriate for your particular problem, and it identifies these mechanisms, and then we have a facilitation team to go off and try to help you get these. So let's see, I'm running out of time. This is what it looks like. We have just fielded it. It's now getting ready. It's about to be deployed to all of our work units. They are on the hook to try to use this to solve some of the problems. We've had a couple of workshops where we have identified potential problems that can take advantage of the solution mechanism guide, and so folks are now on the hook to try to use this stuff. And we are going to, we've gotten all of the feedback on the mechanism, and it's now being deployed, and hopefully we'll have some good results in the next year or so. So to talk a little bit about the challenge that we went through, we used Topcoder. We essentially we had a bid from one of our contractors to do this mechanism. It was, I think, $250,000, and as you can see, by using Topcoder, it only cost us $52,000, and it's a fully developed and usable tool that we have at our disposal. So with that, I think I wanted to leave enough time for some questions. This is my final slide. The keys to getting solutions are you have to have tools and guides that are easy to use, and that you've got your workforce trained in characterizing their problems and to get them to be able to abstract the problem and to try to remove the constraints. The next one is that you have to have access to the external mechanisms, and it has to be not overly bureaucratic, because if it's a heavy learning curve to use the mechanisms, people will just not use them. And of course, so you also need facilitators that can help the people in adopting the mechanisms. And finally, the final key is that you have to get a organizational commitment to giving it a try and to allocating resources to using these mechanisms to see if they can help solve your problems. With that, I'll take a few questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, folks. This is Lois Slavin. I'm the SDM Communications Director, and it is time for Q&A. If you have any questions for Mark, please type them directly into the chat section addressed to everyone. And while some of you folks are doing that, I would like to remind you that we will be sending everyone who has registered a link to the webinar recording and the slides in about a week. First question, Mark, is do you have examples of open innovation in highly competitive industries? And if so, how do you protect your core business know-how?
As far as I know, there are lots of companies that I'll give you an example of a company. Procter & Gamble has done a lot of work in this area. Essentially, what they do is they post challenges, and they come up with an agreement with the solvers as to how much of the IP. Most of the time, the solvers agree to give up their IP in exchange for the monetary award. So I do believe it works in other industries, particularly competitive industries. It's just a matter of the other thing that I think that InnoCentive does is they do have a mechanism for trying to, you know, if you have to reveal your sort of trade secrets in order to get people interested in solving the problem. The other, I'll just say, one of the nice ways to do that is to get involved with a governmental agency like NASA, for example, because we do not hold on to our IP. If we essentially, if we pay for something, what we do is by us paying for it, we get exclusive rights to use whatever is developed, but the company is free to take their idea and go make money off of it. So working with the government has its benefits, and IP is one of them.
Thank you. Our next question is from George Lordos, who writes, Mark, thank you. Is your SMG tool only in use by employees in your directorate, or is it in use throughout NASA? What about availability of the tool to other outside organizations who might find it useful? Is it freely available?
Well, of course, it was developed with your tax dollars, and I have not done any investigation about how tightly we're going to hold on to it, but I think the framework is data-driven, and so essentially what we're willing to share the framework with you, I think. But if you're really interested in pursuing that, you just need to contact me, and we'll work that offline. You know, essentially, I believe that we are willing to. Essentially, what I think we would, the way I would answer it is, we're willing to let folks have it, but we're not really willing to help them implement it. So it's one of those things where a lot of the information in it is data-driven, and so you have to formulate your questions and do those kind of things. But I think we're more than willing to demonstrate it to you, and you can see the utility of it once you've had a few test runs on it.
Thank you, Mark. Now we have a question from Christina. Have you integrated this with internal process improvement efforts?
We are in the process of doing that. So what we did is we have gotten the application fully validated that it works, and we're in the process of rolling it out to the work units right now. So essentially, it can be used for, it's mostly used for technology development, not necessarily process improvement. I think that it has potential to be used for process improvement, but only in terms of finding tools for process improvement, not necessarily for actually doing the process. Essentially what this tool is for is to provide a mechanism for somebody to go off and solve a problem. It doesn't actually help solve the problem. It's sort of a guide to somebody who's interested in using other non-traditional ways of solving their problem.
Okay, we have two questions from Michael Okrent. I will give them to you one at a time. The first is, how do you train facilitators?
Well, so what we ended up doing is we have a dedicated team. It's called the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. They are all supported by our innovation unit, and actually our unit does help support challenges across the whole federal government if they request it. So essentially what the way the workforce was trained is by getting them involved in the beta testing on the application, and also working with users. Plus, they also have to have some familiarization with each of the mechanisms.
All right, Michael's next question begins with a comment, which is, I like your slide on finding solutions in your inner circle. Actually, he has two questions embedded here. Have you developed an SME directory for innovations within NASA? And have you been able to use this technique for improving the culture and governance of NASA? At the Human Health and Performance Directorate, we do have a subject matter expert network. Each of our, as I mentioned, the way we work on our work is by the risk, using the risk domain, and so we have risk owners for each of our risks. The NASA at Work application is a broad, it's really, people are self-assigned to that. If you're interested in looking around beyond what your specific job is, you can join the NASA at Work solving team. But we don't have essentially a map of subject matter experts. We do have a hierarchy of subject matter experts that are one of the ways that we've identified the kind of challenges we're going to need to do for human exploration is we have these things called technology area roadmaps. I think there's roughly 16 of them, and in each one of these roadmaps, it's really sort of a laundry list of everything that we need to solve in order to get humans out into the universe. I hope that answers the question. Okay. Before we go on to the next questions, and there are several, I would like to say to those of you who will be leaving us at 1, we appreciate your joining us. Just a reminder, you will get a link to the webinar recording and the slides in about a week. I also would like everyone to know that the webinar series will be on hiatus until mid-September, and you will be sent a notification around early September about our upcoming webinar and the resumption of this series. Also, just a reminder that SDM will be sponsoring a conference on innovation. It will be held at MIT September 28th with back to the classroom sessions that are optional the day before. You can learn more about that at sdm.mit.edu. The conference sells out, so if you are interested, do check it sooner rather than later. Back to the questions from Mark. And by the way, folks, keep the questions coming. Mark said he could stay for a few minutes after 1. First of all, just wanted everyone to know that the last question actually came from Mary Parker. Mary, thank you very much for your question. Next, we have a question from Bahubali Shah, who asks, how do you manage confidentiality when a problem involves proprietary information?
Yeah, so so some mechanisms are not suitable for confidentiality. You have to really be willing to divulge things in order to get the network to respond properly. So what you do in cases where you really have a strong need to keep the information close is you have to use one of those mechanisms that is suitable for that kind of a thing. The way we handle it, I think the way they handle it on InnoCentive is they may have an NDA that potential solvers have to sign.
Okay.
This, of course, does extremely limits the amount of people that are interested in solving the problem, because the concept for an outfit like InnoCentive is the people that are interested in participating are interested in competing with the people in their community, and that's sort of the charge they get, is by winning the prizes. And so by limiting the amount of competition, that also limits these guys' particular interest, because what they want to do is beat their competitors.
Thank you. It looks like we have one more question, unless others enter theirs in the next few minutes. This one is from Thomas Mills, who writes, although there are a few high-profile examples, could you comment on why the adoption rate of using open innovation as a tool within high-tech companies' innovation process is so slow?
Yeah, and so there's just a ton of reasons why people are reluctant. Particularly in high tech, where you have world-class experts, a lot of the sort of reason for doing work when you're a world-class expert is for the recognition that you get from doing the work. And if you've farmed out the work to other people, then that is a sort of a dilution to your own sort of personal recognition. So what you have to do in order to try to tackle that issue is to provide the kind of incentives to the people. One is to provide recognition for adoption of the mechanisms, which is one of the things that we did, is by giving awards to folks who took the effort to try one of these new things. And the second thing is make sure that you've got the one of the things that keeps people from adopting this is not understanding the value proposition. So as everything, each kind of mechanism requires a little bit of effort, and so people, when they're deciding what they're doing, they have to do a calculus on what's the amount of effort I have to put in versus what's the reward for me. And so what you have to do is make that value proposition to something that the rank and file derives value from. And once you've done that, then I think you have a much higher adoption rate. The other thing is, I think key is to have a few pilots where you've tried it out and you've seen if it works for your firm in the context of trying to get products to market.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Mark, thank you for an excellent webinar. Just a reminder, again, you'll be getting a link to the webinar recording and the slides in about a week. Thank you for joining us for this season of webinars, and we look forward to having you join us in September for the webinar series or the conference. Mark, thank you again, and have a great day, everyone.